Let's talk US, China, Venezuela.
Sure.
Um, so, welcome everyone. My name is Mark Leon Goldberg. I'm the host of Global Dispatches, which is a podcast about foreign policy and international affairs. And I often host live chats here on Substack. It sort of adds like a sense of urgency and directness to the topic at hand. And certainly today, that is warranted. Kaiser, why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Kaiser Kuo. I am the host of the Sinica podcast, Sinica, which is a show on current affairs in China. It's an interview format show and it's weekly. So I also run it out of Substack. So it's just sinicapodcast.com or Sinica, .substack.com. So yeah, check me out. I've been doing this for 15 years. So
I know. Well, that's the other thing. You're like one of the rare podcasters that have done this longer than I.
Yeah.
And I should say, just a quick plug, I am a huge fan of Kaiser and his work. I am a paid subscriber to Sinica. You all should be as well. It is a great, great resource. And I knew, frankly, as I knew I wanted to speak to you, Kaiser, about the Venezuela situation for a number of reasons. One of which, it's sort of being treated as like a footnote here in the American coverage of what's happened. But just hours after meeting a senior Chinese official was when the United States launched this audacious military operation to capture Maduro and his wife. Can you just, like, who was that official? What was that meeting about? Because that's not being treated very deeply here in the United States.
Yeah. So the official is actually a fairly minor diplomat. I mean, he has served as ambassador. Uh, his name is Cho Xiaoqi, and he's served as ambassador to a couple of Latin American countries, and is now the special envoy for Latin America from China. It's very unclear. There was no time for a readout from either side on what was actually discussed. Not sure whether the Maduro regime put out readouts from meetings that they had. Lots of speculation, but that's all. I mean, I've heard all sorts of crazy rumors about how he was there to deliver sort of signals intelligence that Maduro was actually under threat from the United States. But there's no evidence to suggest that was anything like that. It's more likely he was there to talk about the very many deals that China had in place with the Maduro regime. China does quite a bit of trade with China. I mean, with Venezuela, or did. I'm not sure how much of it will. I mean, Trump has said the oil will continue to flow to China. They're not going to interdict this, but Venezuela, again, there's this tendency to overestimate China's dependence on Venezuelan oil. It's actually less than 5% of China's oil imports in given years recently, although it does represent a significant amount of Venezuela's outbound exports. I mean, China has like 2/3 of the actual, I don't remember. Again, this was mostly being exported to little teapot refineries in the Shandong Peninsula. These are refineries that are capable of handling the kind of heavy, high metallic content and sour, that is high sulfur content, crude that Venezuela produces. But again, okay, so yeah, I mean, back to Cho Xiaoqi, we don't know. We don't know what the content of the conversation was. And I guess, I mean, we don't know a lot. I mean, there's been just so much damn speculation about everything. Every time somebody tries to bring China into the conversation, I think there's a lot of kind of silly hot take and speculation.
So just in terms of Venezuela and Chinese trade, I mean, the point you are making to me now, and a point you made in a recent episode of your own show just yesterday, was that Venezuela is less important to China as China is to Venezuela.
That's right.
And that is sort of, it seems in a lot of American commentary that hasn't really pierced the bubble. But that's an important, I think, note to make just in terms of trade relations.
Yeah, I mean, so the numbers, it's about $64 billion in two-way trade between the two, but the lion's share of that is Chinese exports to Venezuela. It's about $48 billion to about $16 billion in Venezuelan exports to China. There are loans. I mean, China between, I think, the between about 2000, I mean, this century so far, about $106 billion in loans. But actually, Venezuela has paid back most of that. There's an outstanding debt of about $10 billion, which, a lot of people are suggesting that China is just simply ready to write off at this point.
Mm.
Um,
So, we're speaking obviously less than a week
that's right.
since this really, stunning and audacious move by the United States to oust Maduro, claim sovereignty and dominion over Venezuela. I'm curious to learn from you, what has been like the official commentary you're seeing in official state media in China in response to what's happened over the last week?
Yeah, I think it's no surprise at all that China has reacted in the way that it has. It's just basically labeled the United States a rogue actor for doing this. Just pointed out that this was a serious violation of norms. They, in the early days, immediately after January 3rd, they talked about it mostly in terms of uh, violations of UN charter. They did not talk about, they didn't invoke international law. But a few days into it, they started to, and that was an interesting change. They started to talk about international law, of course, because, on the one
Yeah,
hand,
what does that suggest to you, that
I
like
mean,
semantic difference?
China itself does not, I mean, it prizes national sovereignty. It does not tend to invoke international law. It doesn't see itself necessarily as bound by international law any more than the United States does, but it does constantly invoke the UN. I mean, everything that it talks about in terms of its, global governance initiatives and things like that, it's all couched in terms of empowering the UN as an organization.
Mhm.
You are something of an expert on the United Nations, right? So you're very aware of how seriously China takes the UN, and
Yeah.
how so much of its diplomacy, so much of its sort of development work in the global South is really aimed at corralling support for China in that body. So
Mhm.
that was the initial reaction. I mean, obviously, it believes that there's some sort of moral high ground to be taken here, right? That in pointing out, it's just sort of the trans the you know transgressive behavior of the United States. It can continue to rally support not only from other countries in Latin America, but also just across the global South. That it will see
Mhm.
China as the sort of stable actor in this, and the more predictable one, where the United States is sort of the more rogue after. China is the defender of national sovereignty, and I mean it's been pretty effective at positioning itself as the defender of kind of multilateralism. And this didn't start at all with Venezuela. I mean, this goes back, quite a bit to, well, at least as far back as 2023 to October 7th, right?
Mhm.
So
That's interesting. So that's like what I would have sort of
yeah,
expected from China, is that, you exploit this just transparently illegal, transgressive move by the United States, in which they are not even couching their actions in any pretense of exhortation to higher values of democracy, of freedom. Rather, the United States is just very transparently doing this to extract Venezuela's natural resources. And they've said so themselves. So, when you talk about like big geopolitical, um, you know, consequences here, it would seem that China is like poised to exploit that. And you did see that in that first Security Council meeting
right.
that happened last Monday at the United Nations. You saw like a gang up on the United States, of which China was like happily to participate.
Of course, of course. No surprise there at all. I mean, but the other question that comes up immediately, and it was hours after we learned about the rendition of Maduro, there were people talking about, well, now that the United States has acted so transgressively, now that it is so obviously flouted these international norms and international law, won't this embolden China? Won't this, mean that China will feel no compunction whatsoever about making a move on Taiwan, for example? I mean, that's where everyone immediately went. It seems to
Yeah.
be this kind of reflex now. Something happens, and somehow there's a Taiwan angle. I mean, they did the same
Mhm.
thing with in 2014, when the little green men incursion happened, and then Crimea ended up being snatched by Putin, and again, in 2022 when that
Mm.
happened. So yeah, it's that I think is a particularly silly take.
Yeah. Well, so I agree for reasons I think you'll explain in a minute that it's a like silly take, but I do sort of understand why people would make that logical leap for the fact that the United States is now just, declaring the Western Hemisphere as quote ours, which suggests that maybe other hemispheres are left to others, and suggests that, maybe Asia is China's for the taking if Latin America is America's for the taking in kind of this new world order that the Trump administration seems to be fomenting.
Well, I'm certainly not the only person to say this, but I think hypocrisy will be the standard here. Just because Trump is claiming for himself sort of this hemispheric, proprietorship, the Donroe Doctrine. I hope I don't
Yeah.
have to hear that phrase again, but that doesn't mean that he's ready to cede to any other actor their own sphere of influence. That doesn't mean that he's now going to just sort of say, okay, well, I guess that means that China, you have full sway in your own neighborhood. I don't think that that's necessarily how he's couching this. He will
Mhm.
continue to assert, American, uh, if not primacy, but at least a significant, role for the United States in the Western Pacific. And of course, in Europe, I mean, he's not going to cede the entire continent of Europe to Vladimir Putin either. Um, Again, that's the other take that I found was particularly kind of risible.
Yeah. So on Taiwan specifically, as you said, there is this kind of conventional wisdom that emerged within the next, hours after
Minutes,
the U.S. action in Venezuela, that this will embolden or somehow give license to Xi to, move on Taiwan. Why is that not an accurate representation of maybe how China sees things?
well, I mean, there are several reasons, but first of all, and probably most importantly, China's intentions on Taiwan are have been long in the making. I mean, this is something that goes back a very, very, very long time. Um, to the actual period of the Civil War. To this idea that the historical inevitability of the total conquest, the total defeat of the Nationalist Party, the Kuomintang, in 1949, was going to continue with a move across the strait to where they had sort of gone off to, and that it was only the intervention of the United States that thwarted this inevitable historical process. So they've never regarded this war as over. They've never regarded this as a matter of international law. This is to in the Chinese way of thinking, this is an entirely domestic affair. This is the unfinished civil war, and for them, international law makes not a whit of difference.
Mhm.
And the fact that Trump has done something like this doesn't change their calculation in the least. That is not to. I'm not in the camp of people who believes that it's around the corner, that China is that Davidson window 2027, that's the year that China is going to make. I don't believe any of that. I think that China is far from ready to do that, and they're still really looking for many reasons not to do it. I think that they're still keen on preserving what they believe to be a status quo, sort of before this period of salami slicing began,
Mhm.
sort of the way things were before the election of Tsai Ing-wen in 2016.
Mhm. Yeah, just like, important, I think, just to emphasize what you just said which is, that this, Taiwan is not like an international issue
Right.
for China, although it is for the rest of the world.
Right.
And so maybe it's like the rest of the world might be maybe might, I think that's like probably why you're seeing the reaction that you're seeing when people are pointing directly to Taiwan as
Sure.
maybe this move giving license to Xi.
Right. So what I think that what they mean, and I think that maybe a good faith interpretation of that, maybe a more generous interpretation, is they think that while it would still generate international opprobrium, it would maybe reduce the chances of actual intervention in the eventuality of a Chinese move on Taiwan. Right.
Mm,
And so that would change their calculus of deterrence.
yeah.
That is possible. I think I would even add to that yes, China cares very much about international opprobrium, and it does care quite a bit about believing that it is in the right in situations like this. I think it places a very strong premium on this idea of righteousness. It maybe that sounds counterintuitive to a lot of people who think that its calculations are entirely sort of, realpolitik. That's not the case. Uh, Much of what they do is intended to try to sort of diffuse or dissolve or dilute the international opprobrium that they would encounter. What they want to appear to be in the right. That's always
Mm,
how they couch the language in these highly moralistic terms.
mhm.
So yeah, in that sense, perhaps, but I think that it's relatively inconsequential to the final calculus.
Yeah.
Yeah, Xi
So
Jinping hasn't, didn't wake up to the news of Maduro. I mean, I guess he was in the middle of the day for him, and say, "Aha! Now is the time to move on Taiwan."
So I wanted to go back to a point you made earlier at the outset, which is that, China has been placing just much more emphasis and is investing very heavily these days in the United Nations, in specifically, if not like, international law writ large, the United Nations as an institution and its agencies, it is investing in. At the same time that the United States is, withdrawing from like the UN and various agencies, not the UN itself, but you saw like this list of
66,
international,
yeah,
yeah,
66.
different international organizations, but in general, not only is the United States kind of like just becoming less of a player at the UN itself, but it's paying now like little regard to like the liberal international order that the UN represents. At the same time, as I said, that China is digging in more deeply there. And it seems to me that in this kind of context of what you said about, China kind of wanting to frame its foreign policy as like righteousness, that this is like an opportunity now for China to kind of seize the high ground, to kind of do this kind of soft power things that, at least in my view, it had been unable to do or unwilling to do for a long time. And I'm wondering if you see that as like a trajectory of Chinese foreign policy going forward.
I do. I very much see it as that. I mean, we can look at all sorts of rich ironies. In 2016, after the election of Donald Trump in 2017, Xi Jinping gave a speech at Davos in which he sort of, positioned himself or China as the bearer of the banner of globalism, of globalization, right?
Mhm.
Of free trade. Uh, all along. I mean, China has all positioned itself during this period where we've seen, for example, Gaza, of course, after October 7th, um, as kind of the defender of this, ironically, rules-based international order, right? And they see an opportunity to do that once again. They're already really leaning into that. You can see it, and it's interesting. They've, as my guest on Seneca, Eric Olander, pointed out, they are sort of willing to be the lightning rod, willing to be the one who's saying this and giving cover to other countries that might be in a position where they would face retribution from the mercurial Trump administration, were they to be too critical. They've given cover to a lot of other sort of um, you know mid-sized states that would want to be more vocal in their criticism of Trump, but are happy to allow China to carry the message.
Yeah. So, I mean, I keep viewing, maybe I'm like overinterpreting America's actions in Venezuela, but at least to me, this seems like an epical moment in like the history, in modern history. I wrote something that's akin to like the 1956 Suez Crisis or the
Mm.
fall of the Berlin Wall or September 11th, for the fact that America's actions here are just so like transparently imperialist, and they don't even like there's like no cynicism here. Like they are just going after Venezuela's natural resources because they can. And I don't think that a world in which the United States premises its foreign policy based on like dominion of other dominating other sovereign countries in the Western Hemisphere is sustainable alongside like a rules-based international order. And I guess my kind of key kind of question that outstanding here geopolitically is, to what extent is China going to like lean into that rules-based world order and be like see an opportunity to present itself as like the guarantor of that order as the United States exits it.
Yeah, I think that's very much what China will do. I mean, it's very much how China will doubtless see the situation as an opportunity to do that. To fill in that vacuum that's been left. They are the stable alternative to this madman, to this chaos, right? They've been really making this case for quite a while, like I said, beginning with being the standard bearer for a global trading order, things like that. They've certainly been gifted a lot of these things. In the meantime, they're trying their best to make themselves sort of sanctions proof, to prevent themselves from being vulnerable to choke point, to various choke points. Look, this isn't something that China fits naturally or comfortably in. They've always been, a critic about this idea that there is a rules-based international order, because that was always assumed to be a Western-led, a liberal, rules-based international order. They have made inroads in things like in technology standards. They see the utility of these multilateral bodies, especially the United Nations, in advancing some Chinese interests. But now you see them now advancing their own these initiatives, these global governance initiative, global development initiative, global civilization initiative, new global security initiatives, new proposals in global AI governance. And I'm sure, recognize that the U.S. retreat from this is giving them opportunities to advance that agenda. Now, do I think that means that China wants to sort of impose its own vision on this order? I don't think it's that ambitious. I don't think that it believes that it can fully supplant the United States in its old role there. But I think that they will certainly see this as an opportunity to enhance, China's standing.
Is there anything else you want to mention before let you go? A question I didn't ask, point you wanted to make?
No, that's you've covered it all. I mean, I again, like, none of these are either my original ideas or, for that matter, things that I know with a great deal of certitude. I mean, I've been watching the reaction. It's interesting. I guess maybe one thing that we could talk about, that I talked about with Eric Olander on the show. It's interesting how little the Chinese censorial apparatus has come into, has come online to squelch like really stridently nationalistic criticism of the United States, or sort of these own. You see a lot of talk about, hey, maybe we could do the same thing. Maybe we could just mount a special forces operation to snatch William Lai Ching-te from the from his capital in Taipei. This is interesting that it's been allowed to to be online. I mean, usually they I like to say China sits over the fire pit of online nationalism with a fan in one hand and a fire hose in the other. That if they want, they can just sort of fan it up and get these flames really roaring. But when it threatens to burn down the valuable surrounding countryside, they can hose it down, and they often do. And they don't like to cede control. They don't like to feel beholden to the strident online nationalist voices.
But they're letting the strident online nationalism run rampant at the moment, what does that suggest to you?
Yeah, I mean, for one thing, I think that, as we're all very aware, China's economy, the economic conditions right now aren't ideal. That there are a lot of people who are smarting In fact, it's a pretty close overlap to the sort of very online people, people who are urban and live in cities who are seeing their big nest egg just sort of fall in value, the house they own, right, the apartment they own, and yeah, we know there's high youth unemployment. There are a lot of reasons for them to seek some kind of a distraction, and this is kind of a rally around the flag effect. That would be my guess. But also, it's useful. They're in this situation right now with Takeda in Japan. They want to be able to point to this sort of rabid nationalist base, and so it can often give them cover. They can say, "Look, I can't compromise too much. I have this rabid nationalist base online. See all the stuff they say.
Yeah.
You got to cut me some slack."
Well, Kaiser, I always appreciate speaking with you. It's great to talk directly to you as opposed to just being a fan who listens to your show. So thank you for the opportunity to let me interview you. And again, everyone should check out Sinica. And if you are a follower of Kaiser's and you want to check out Global Dispatches, please visit globaldispatches.org.
Good.
We do all sorts of international affairs, international news. So thank you.
Yeah, and to save us from hell.
And to save us from hell. That is my podcast about the United Nations.
Yeah. It's a good.
All right.
Thanks,
well,
Mark.
thank you, everyone. All right. Thanks, Kaiser.
Take
Bye.
care.